There we go. Recording in progress. Okay, so welcome back, everyone. I'll remind you all again at the end. I have to take the next 2 Mondays off. For different conflicts. So the next session after tonight will be on January 24th. What we did last time that we met right in December, we were talking about anti-Semitism in the Greek and Roman period. We did one session on anti-Judaism in the Bible, and we did one session on anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism in the period of the Hellenistic period and the Roman period. And today, the topic tonight is anti-Judaism in the Christian Bible or the New Testament. So that's what we're looking at tonight. There is so much we can say there. And just as a point of introduction, what we spent the last couple sessions talking about was whether it's possible to talk about anti-Judaism or anti-Semitism before the advent of Christianity. And we found that actually there are significant cases of actions against Jews, of protests, of hatred, of violence, and of prejudice. What we saw, though, the argument that I tried to make last 2 weeks ago when we had our last class is that the position of the Jews, especially in Egypt, as the minority, within a larger empire, that the Jews will attract or use sort of as a symbol of the local population, will take their anger against the Jews when there's really conflict with the wider imperial authority. So the Jews will get stuck on the side of that triangle there. And we saw that in the biblical period, and we talked about the Jews at Elephantine Island, where the Jews are caught between the Egyptians and the Persians. We saw the same thing in Alexandria, where the Jews are caught between the Egyptians, the Greeks, and the Romans. And then the same thing in land of Israel itself, when you have the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans there. What's different with the Christian Bible, the New Testament, and Christianity is that the Jews are not just a people that are a minority within the Christian world, but they are the people of tremendous symbolism, and that the symbolic role of Judaism in the foundations of Christianity is clear in the Christian scriptures, which we'll look at a few passages tonight. And we're going to see how that reverberates through the history of anti-Semitism in the Christian medieval in medieval Christianity. And we're going to spend at least 3 sessions on the medieval story and then going into the early modern period. Because of course, as we know, Christianity grew out of Judaism. Jesus was Jewish, lived in the land of Israel. But there's more than that we're going to look at this evening in terms of how, and there are different voices. There's no one voice in the Christian Bible, but we're going to look at how the Christian Bible talks about Jews and the symbolic power that Judaism and Jews hold in the Christian Bible. And those will introduce certain themes that will continue to play out in the story that we're talking. So I'm going to put the share screen on now for the second. There it is. 1 second. Okay. Everybody sees there we go. Okay.
Yes, we're good.
Okay, very good. So the first passage I want to look at here is from the first letter to the Corinthians. It's when we look at historically what the Christian Bible says about anything, we always want to look at the letters of Paul before we look at the Gospels, even though that's counterintuitive, because the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John will tell the story of Jesus, and then Paul lives after after Jesus, and he is the apostle who spreads missionarizes Christianity throughout the Greek Roman world. So, but the reason why we start with Paul's letters is that they're the earlier sources, that the letters of Paul are the oldest sources that we have on Christianity, and they were written before the evangelists wrote the gospel. So that's why we start with Paul. And this I'm calling here Paul's epistemology and how he understands knowledge. It says there in chapter 1, this is selected from verses 20 through 24, where are the philosophers? Where are the scribes? While the Jews require signs, it's the Greek semeia, and the Greeks look for wisdom, which in Greek is Sophia, we are preaching a crucified Christ, a scandal to the Jews, to the Gentiles, foolishness. But to that who have been called, or to those who have been called, whether they are Jews or Greeks, a Christ who is both the power of God and the wisdom of God. First of all, the reason why those two key words that I put into Greek there is that, of course, the Christian scriptures are written in Greek, and the versions that we have are English translations of the Greek. What Paul is seeing here is there are two basic approaches to knowledge in the Jewish world and the Greek world, the Roman world, which he's writing to. In this case, he's writing to the Christian community in Corinth, which is a city in Greece. And he says that the Greeks are interested in wisdom, in Sophia. Philosophy is the love of wisdom. And the Jews are interested in signs. They look for, most of the commentaries say this is about miracles, as the way the Bible's told. We're reading now in the Torah the account of the 10 plagues as the signs that Moses brings as the proof of God's of God's presence and command. Deeper way to understand signs is that Jews look for things that are told in history, things that they read. It's how they understand the world as signified around them, where the Greeks look at things philosophically. Of course, these are generalizations, but Paul is setting up that those are two basic ways of approaching knowledge. And Christianity is offering a third approach, which is the truth in a sense of the crucified Christ. And to take the Gentiles is interchangeable with Greeks. So when he says that to the Gentiles foolishness, he's saying that philosophically, you could never philosophically come to the conclusion of a resurrected Savior, right? That's something you have to accept on faith. So the Gentiles, that is the Greeks, take that as foolishness. The Jews take it as scandalous. It's the scandalous to the Jews, and there's different ways of reading how that's scandalous, right? It's scandalous because they don't believe that Jesus is the Messiah. It's scandalous because they don't understand, they don't recognize the resurrection, don't accept the resurrection. That was a matter of fact from Paul's perspective. But a deeper way of understanding it also is that it's a scandal to the Jews because the Jews, there's no greater sign than the crucifixion and resurrection. And the Jews are not able to read the signs that are right in front of them. And that's the scandal there. And I'm saying that because we're going to see that played in the few passages that we're going to look at following this one, that with the Greeks, it's what's lacking is faith. And with the Jews, what's lacking is discernment or sight, that the Jews don't understand what's right, what's directly in front of them. The comment I have on the bottom is from Nuremberg's book, Anti-Judaism, written by David Nuremberg from the University of Chicago. It was the text that I was recommending to kind of read along with the class. His comment on this passage is that Jew and Greek are not understood here as types, right? They're symbolic types, and they stand together in companionable error with Jewish signs and Greek learning just two versions of the world's wisdom, two forms of knowledge that both need to be superseded by the would-be followers of Jesus. And this idea of supersessionism he's introducing there, it's the idea that Christianity is not an alternative religion to Judaism or to the paganism of the Greeks, but Christianity puts itself forward as a superior religion because it's the continuation of what God first revealed to the Jews. It's that is superseded by the New Covenant or the New Testament. That's why the term is used, New Testament versus Old Testament, or covenant is another word for testament. And it's why Jews prefer not to use the terms New Testament and Old Testament, because the very term Old Testament implies that it's superseded, that it's surpassed by a New Testament. Generally, I use the term Christian Bible and Jewish Bible. Many scholars will use the term the Greek scriptures and the Hebrew scriptures. The Hebrew scriptures, of course, being the Tanakh, the Jewish Bible, and the Greek scriptures being the Christian Bible. Let's look at this, another selection from Paul. And here Paul is talking about spirit and the letter, which is two incredibly important ideas, really one idea in understanding the way that Christianity sees the Jews and Judaism through so much of its history. This is taken from the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 3, verses 6 to 16. So I'll just read it here and then we'll try to break it down. God has made us competent to be ministers of a new covenant. I put an N there, sorry about that. Whoops, let's fix that. Not of letter, but of spirit. Now this term new covenant, supposed to think of New Testament, so that us, meaning Paul and the fellow apostles, are ministers of a New Testament, a new revelation. But unlike the old that was brought by Moses, that was of the letter, and this is of the spirit. For the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. Now the ministry of death, chiseled in letters on stone tablets, came in glory, so that the people of Israel could not gaze at Moses' face because of the glory of his face. So glory now set aside. How much more will the ministry of spirit come in glory? For if there was glory in the ministry of condemnation, much more does the ministry of justification abound in glory. For if what was set aside came through glory, much more is the permanent come in glory. Since then we have such a hope, we act in boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face to keep the people of Israel from gazing at the end of the glory that was being set aside, but their minds were hardened. Indeed, to this very day, when they hear the reading of the old covenant, that same veil is still there, since only in Christ is it set aside. Indeed, to this very day, whenever Moses is read, a veil lies over their minds. When one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. It's a long passage here. Let me try to break it down a bit more. The ministry of sorry? Someone asking a question? No. Okay, the ministry of death is a rather pejorative reference to the rabbis or the Torah, really. But I prefer it to the rabbis because it's meant here, it contrasts with ministers of a new covenant. Ministers of the new covenant are the apostles of the New Testament. So that's opposed to the covenant of death, which is the Old Testament. And that's in fact chiseled in letters on stone tablets. So that's supposed to give us the image of the 10 Commandments, which Moses brings back from Sinai. Obviously, the 10 Commandments is a very, very small part of the Jewish Bible, but that's the image that he's going with here. Came in glory, so the people of Israel could not gaze at Moses' face because of the glory of his face. So he's referring there to a passage in the book of Exodus, when Moses comes down from the mountain, from Mount Sinai. His face is glowing because he was exposed to the direct presence of God. And it says in the Torah that he puts the people are scared, so he puts a veil over his face. And what Paul says here is this is actually a very rabbinic argument. It's what in the rabbinic literature is called a kal v'chomer argument. And the way that works here is Paul is saying, and it's very Talmudic here. And I wanted to point out the Jewish nature of the argument, because so much of the scholarship about Paul is debating how Jewish that he was, and whether he's really speaking to Jews or to non-Jews, whether he's anti-Jewish, whether he embraces his Judaism. But what's clear here is that his approach is coming out of Jewish milieu and a rabbinic milieu, because he makes a Talmudic argument. He says, if Moses came down from Mount Sinai and the glory of God, which is the presence of God, was shining so strongly from his face, and yet what he was bringing was the ministry of condemnation. The ministry of condemnation is the ministry of death. It's the Jewish Bible. His point is, because what Paul is saying is that in the Torah, you're given a bunch of laws, and if you don't live up to the covenant, then you merit death. You know, as Moses always says, I give before you a choice, choose life. So if you don't live up to the laws, then you're condemned. So it's a ministry of condemnation. But what Jesus brings is a ministry of justification through faith. And that's what Paul, in many other places in his letters, it's the argument that Paul makes, that you're not justified, that you're not made righteous through fulfillment of laws. You're made righteous through faith in the grace of Jesus, the resurrection and salvation. So that's a higher thing, because that's a positive, as opposed to the negative of the ministry of condemnation. So if Moses comes down from the mountain to tell the people, you have to do these laws, and if you don't, then you shall die, and Moses' face is glowing with God's presence, how much the more so would the glory be shine, and that much and much more as when the permanent come in glory, when God through Jesus, which is God's self, comes to say we've forgiven and redeemed the entire world.
About what century was these letters written?
The letters of Paul were written at the end of the first century, in the middle to end of the first century, as Jesus dies around the year 30. So Paul's career is the end of the 30s, the 40s, the 50s. Yeah, good question. So anyway, you see, he's making a Talmudic argument to saying that the glory is that much more powerful with Jesus, and yet Moses has to veil his face. So then he goes on from that Talmudism there, and continues. Since then we have such a hope, we act in boldness, not like Moses, who put a veil over his face, because Moses wanted to keep the people from gazing at the glory that was God. And in fact, their minds were hardened. But when they, meaning the Jews, hear the reading of the old covenant of the Torah, which they hear every week in synagogue, the same veil is still there, right? Meaning that there's a separation, and the Jews are not able to fully see the glory which is behind the law, which is God, as opposed to those who believe in Christ. There it is set aside, and we can experience directly God's glory. And then he says, to this very day, whenever Moses is read, meaning the Torah, so he's talking about what happens in synagogues, a veil lies over their minds, right? They don't understand. And this is the idea of Jews not being able to comprehend and see what's right in front of them. And the veil is separating them. It's over their minds so they can't understand. But when one turns to the Lord, the veil is removed. The Lord meaning Christianity and Jesus. So what Paul has done here, see, is he's sort of set the trope that the Jews are unable to see or understand. In the first point, the first stage of revelation, which was Moses at Sinai, was the covenant of condemnation, and it was a limited revelation. And with Jesus, there's a full coming of the Lord, basically, is what is saying. And the other thing I want us to recognize is this dichotomy between spirit and law. At the very beginning, he says, the letter kills, but the spirit gives life. That's sort of an introduction to this whole passage. The letter are the laws of the Torah, which kill because they condemn those who don't follow to death, which happens to be the punishment for most transgressions in the Torah. But the spirit is that sense of God's self, which is revealed through the New Testament, through the story of Jesus, it gives life, is life-giving rather than death-bringing. And through faith and acknowledgement of that salvation, then one is saved and one inherits life as opposed to death. So it's a message of salvation rather than a message of condemnation. But we also see, besides the separation of the Christian story and the Torah, there's this division into spirit and letter, which is a very, or body, or spirit and body, or body and soul, we might say, which is a very Greek way of looking at the world, something we generally associate with Plato, right? With the idea that there are concrete things in the world, and then there are the eternal ideas that stand behind those concrete things. And many people have looked to Paul and Christianity as one of the reasons why Paul and the Christian message was so successful in spreading throughout most of the Roman world, was that it served as a combination of the monotheism of Judaism with the philosophy of the Greek world, and was able to incorporate those. What Paul is saying here is that there is a physical level of understanding and there is a spiritual level of understanding, and the spiritual level is superior in anything. And in the understanding religion and understanding God and theology, the letter has to come first. That's the physical, which is the law, which is Judaism. And then the spirit comes after that, which is the higher, more advanced understanding, which comes which is represented by Christianity and by Jesus. So you have Jew versus Christian, you have letter versus spirit, we have death versus life, right? We have condemnation versus salvation. So there's all those opposites are placed there in Paul. And while it's a very powerful rhetorical approach that he's taking, he's using Jews and Judaism as a symbol to show what Christianity has surpassed and why Christianity is the higher form of religion. Doesn't seem to be motivated by an animus of anti-Semitism, right? It's not, and we'll see how that is more evidence of that in other parts of the Christian scriptures. But he is placing Judaism as the old, and obviously he is a Jew, and Christianity is growing out of Judaism. But that sense of leaving the old letter, the physicality behind, will continue to come back over the centuries that we see, and that and while he may be talking about ideas here and not actual Jews, the actual Jews who are around will face the consequences, because ideas become translated into people's understanding about each other. So now we're going to go to the Gospels here, and I'm going to start with a passage from Luke. And I call this Luke's reading of Jewish history. This is from the 19th chapter of the Gospel of Luke. He says, and this is a passage here where Jesus is giving a prophecy. He writes, if you had only recognized on this day the way to peace, but in fact it is hidden from your eyes. Yes, a time is coming when your enemies will raise fortifications all around you, when they will encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you and the children inside your walls to the ground. They will leave not one stone standing on another within you, because you did not recognize the moment of your visitation. So I have to understand Luke here as putting into Jesus' mouth a prophecy about what's going to happen in the next generation, because Jesus dies in the 30s, and then in the year 70, Jerusalem falls and the temple is destroyed. So it's about a few decades after Jesus, a terrible tragedy befalls Judea. And what's interesting is that this prophecy of the fall of the city, of the punishments that will face the people, because you always understood loss in a war and tragedy as a divine punishment. That's how the Jews understood going back to the destruction of the first temple from the end of the Bible. We don't find this in any of the letters of Paul. And the reason why we don't find these type of passages in Paul is because Paul is writing after the life of Jesus, but before the Jewish war against the Romans that we talked about last class 2 weeks ago. But Luke, clearly this section is intended for the post-destruction readers, right? So it's written after the fall of Jerusalem. And what is being described here is precisely the fall of Jerusalem. The time is coming when your enemies will raise fortifications all around you, when they will encircle you and hem you. That's the siege of the city, because the Roman legions come, and they will dash you and the children inside your walls to the ground. It's referring to the massive suffering and destruction as during the siege of Jerusalem, and then when the Romans broke the siege. They will leave not one stone standing on another within you. The city is destroyed and the temple burns, which is the greatest building one of the greatest buildings in the whole world, burns to the ground because you did not recognize the moment of your visitation. So this is the explanation. So the explanation for why history goes the way it goes is because you, that is the Jews, did not recognize the moment of your visitation when God was in your midst. Now, yes, this is being put into the mouth of Jesus himself, speaking this to the Jews who are not believing in him in Jerusalem while the temple is still standing. And Jesus is saying, you don't recognize who I am and what I'm here for. So the time will come when your descendants will have to answer for that, and the city will be destroyed. It's a reading of Jewish history. It's an historiography. And the theological import of it is that the Jewish temple was destroyed. So the Christians understood that as proof of the truth of Christianity, right? Because the Jews, that is the Jews who did not accept Jesus, then their city falls. So it was only one way that Christians were able to read that history. The conflict between the Jews and the Romans, although there were Christians at the time, neither side was thinking about Christianity. But the Christian reading of that history presents it as that it is all about Jesus, right? And that was the cosmic development that happened in the year 70. It's a reaction to the Jews not seeing and recognizing Jesus and God right before them 35 years earlier. And throughout Christian history, it's used, the story of the fall of Jerusalem, the fall of the temple, is put forward as proof of Christianity's truth. And because of the way that the course of history worked, and because of this argument that's in the Gospels, that the truth of Christianity is proven by because of the Jewish defeat at the hands of the Romans. So what that leaves us in terms of understanding how anti-Semitism develops is there's a sense from the Christian historical worldview that Jews are supposed to be defeated. Sorry? Okay, everyone please mute unless you have a question. If you have a question, feel free to unmute and interrupt me is fine. Jews are supposed to be defeated, right? Because that's the way that the New Testament understands first century Judean history, and that the course of first century Judean history proves that Christianity supersedes Judaism as the new covenant that God brings. So you understand here what I'm trying to show here is why anti-Jewish prejudice in the history of Christianity is more than just a prejudice against a minority. It's rooted in the foundation in terms of how Christianity developed and how its understanding and how the understanding of Jewish history is so foundational there. Let's look at the next slide and just go, who killed Jesus? Now, this is always the question that comes up in so much of Jewish Christian dialogue, because so much of anti-Jewish violence in the Christian world, right, is brought against the Jews who said they are the Christ killers, and the idea that the Jews would torture and kill Jesus is what stirs up an angry Christian mob to take an action against the Jews. The story that's told in the Gospels is more complicated. It's much more complicated than that. And of course, the Jews didn't have authority to execute anyone in the Roman Empire. Only the Roman state had that authority. And that, in fact, the right to execute criminals, the right of capital punishment is in general, in most legal systems, is the prerogative of the crown or the state, that only the state has the authority to do that. And what some legal historians have made the argument that the development of law in modern society is where you legislate criminal legislation, and then capital punishment and other forms of punishment. We today do more incarceration. That wasn't practiced as much in ancient times. In ancient times, it was either capital punishment where you were executed, corporal punishment where you were whipped or other tortures, or you'd pay a fine. Those were the three consequences of breaking a law. But the more advanced legal cultures were where you, rather than the wrong party to have the right, if someone killed someone, then the family of the victim would then go and be able to kill the person who was the murderer, who murdered someone in their family or their tribe, right? So in more advanced legal societies, while the wrong party or the representative of the wrong party can sue, we call today press charges, only the state can do the execution or execute whatever the other punishment is. So my point there is that in the Roman times, only the Romans had the right to execute whomever that they wanted to be and the Gospels don't disagree with that the execution, the crucifixion, is fulfilled by the Romans, not by the Jews. However, we don't have the time to read here through every part of the story, but what does happen in this, as a way it's told in the Gospels, is that the Jews, or at least the Sanhedrin and the priests, the elite of the Jews, ask Pontius Pilate, who's the procurator, the Roman governor, they ask him to execute Jesus because of the problems that Jesus is causing. And in some of the Gospels, some more than others, but here it's certainly the case in the 27th chapter of Matthew that I have the selection from. This was after the Sanhedrin condemns Jesus. They asked Pilate to now to execute him. And when Pilate saw that he could do nothing, he tried everything to avoid having to execute execute Jesus on the cross. So he says, and rather than that a riot was beginning, that it was going to be a riot if he kept putting off the execution, the crucifixion, he took some water and washed his hands before the crowd. Sorry for the typo there with crowd, saying, I am innocent of this man's blood, see to it yourself. So it's he does an atilat yadayim, right? Sort of a washing of the hands, a very visual, ritual sense of, in order to purify himself, because he doesn't want to carry the guilt. And he says publicly, I'm innocent of this man's blood. Now, he's not innocent because he orders the crucifixion after doing this. He is innocent in the sense that when you have a governmental process, there's still, if you have capital punishment, the state still has to perform the act. But here he says, I don't want to do this, take it upon yourselves. And then the people as a whole answered, his blood be upon us and upon our children. So this is probably the most notorious sentence in the most problematic sentence, say, in the New Testament, in the Christian Bible, in terms of Jewish-Christian relations, and is often cited as a cause of anti-Jewish prejudice and anti-Semitism in the Christian world, because it impugns upon the Jews. It's saying the Jews said, his blood, meaning Jesus' blood, be upon us and on our children. Like you don't need to carry the guilt, Pontius Pilate in Rome. We wanted you to kill him, and we can accept responsibility, and not only upon us, but also upon our children. And the fact that the blood is impugned onto the children is something that then is referred to, and we see that reverberate through the whole history of anti-Semitism, especially in Christian Europe, because you could say, well, how could the Jews living in this town or this village be called Christ killers, be responsible for killing Jesus when Jesus was killed 1,000 years, was crucified 1,000 years ago? And the answer is, well, they point to the 27th chapter of Matthew and says, no, because the Jews in the first century, they said his blood be upon us and on our children. Obviously, it's recorded only on the Christian side, but that's how this reverberates through. Now, I want to show you this sentence that's right underneath. It's from the book of Jeremiah, from the Tanakh, from the Jewish Bible. It's a verse there. Be assured, however, that if you put me to death, you will bring the guilt of innocent blood on yourselves and on this city and on those who live in it. It's a passage where Jeremiah is preaching to the people of Jerusalem. And Jeremiah is a sort of a prophet of doom at the end of the first temple period. And he's setting the stage for, much of it's of course written after, for why the temple should be destroyed. That's the first temple there. So the first temple is destroyed by the Babylonians in 586 BCE. The second temple is 70 CE by the Romans, which is the generation after Jesus. But the Jeremiah quotation is important because it seems, at least to me, pretty clear that Matthew knows that verse from Jeremiah, because it says that if you put me to death, because this is the prophet. So the prophet Jeremiah is prophesying to the people of Jerusalem, and they're not listening to him, just like Jesus was speaking to the people of Jerusalem, and they don't hear him and don't recognize the truth, quote unquote, of what he's saying. And what Jeremiah says is that the consequence of not only not hearing me, but putting me to death is that you'll bring the guilt of innocent blood on yourselves, and not only yourselves, but also on the city and all the people who live in the city. Now, in fact, the city is destroyed because Jerusalem falls to Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians in 586 BCE. So the comparison that Matthew is drawing on, and this is one example, every other verse in the Christian Bibles is you can look in different, depends on what edition you look at, but they're all referencing verses from the Tanakh, from the Jewish Bible. It's true that you can't really understand the literary force of the Christian Bible without seeing the verses that it's referring to. And if we understand it's referring to this verse, then we understand that Matthew's point is exactly what, like, let me just put this up here, is exactly what Luke is talking about in this passage. And there are other passages I could have referred to besides just one of Luke, that we're talking about the destruction of Jerusalem. So when Jeremiah says, if you put me to death, the guilt of it will be on you in this city, it refers to this city that will be destroyed with not a stone standing only 40 years later. So that is their children, because it's the next generation, and it means that the city will be destroyed. So yes, there is an anti-Jewish element to it, but what I want to get across here is that the original context of this most problematic sentence of all sentences in the Christian Bible, his blood be upon us and on our children, is most likely talking about the destruction of Jerusalem in 70, and not saying that forever and ever and all time, all Jews should be seen as Christ killers, as the people that sought to kill God and put God on a cross. So, I wanted to break this down a bit. It's still problematic, and there's so much that has to be addressed with this section from Matthew. But understanding the context there, I think, should help, and puts even more light on how this developed and was used later in later periods. Many of you know that I've spent a lot of time with the Oberammergau Passion Play production in Germany. They put on every 10 years. It's the 220. It's a story of the end of Jesus' life, of the trial and the crucifixion, and it's been done every 10 years in a small Bavarian town since the mid 17th century. The 2020 production was postponed to this coming summer. Whether it actually happens this summer is still an outstanding question, which we'll see. But when I've been involved with different Jewish dialogues with the director, and that they do this line, his blood be upon us and our children. He said, do you have to say that line? He says, well, that's a big line. How did we not say that line? Now, and yet when that line is said, it's said usually with a sense of anger and wrath against the Jews on the stage. And we think about how that's read when throughout all times of history, when people read the Christian Bible, they read that and then they go outside and there's Jews that are living right down the block, right outside the church. When this passage is read in church, you can see how this is a literary cause of feelings that then explode between people. So this is the key text. The top of the line here is the key text for us to think about. We can come back and I'll take some time for thoughts at the end. I just have two more things. One last passage I want to do here, and this is from the Gospel of John, and I call it John's condemnation of the Jews' paternity. From the 8th chapter of John, says in this passage, Jesus is having an exchange with a group of Jews, And they're saying, we have the same father. The father is Abraham, our father is God. And Jesus is denying that. He says, you are from your father, but your father is not Abraham. Your father is not God. Your father is the devil. And you prefer to do what your father wants. Whoever comes from God listens to the word of God. The reason why you do not listen is that you are not from God. So it takes this another step that this is we talk about whether Jews are demonized, right? In this sense, it's the approach that Paul is doing by making these dichotomies and these opposites in symbolic terms, but here it goes much further and saying Christians are the descendants of God, Jews are the descendants of the devil. And this is the extreme formulation here. I want to share with you, I took this from David Nierenberg's book, and this is his comment on this section, this sentence here from the Gospel of John. He writes, John's response seems to be an adaptation of Paul's argument that one can be Abraham's heir in the spirit as well as the flesh, right? Because that was when Paul's talking about the mission to the non-Jews, to the Greeks, to the Gentiles, the question is, can you become a Christian if you're not a descendant of the children of Israel? And many of the early Christians thought you had to convert to Judaism in order to become a Christian. Paul says, no, you don't have to be Jewish.
It's like the rabbi froze.
Has the rabbi been abducted?
I think we lost the presenter. We lost the presenter.
Yeah, we did.
It looks like his connection has completely been severed.
I think you're still on mute.
Well, that's,
Yeah.
we have,
If there was an easy way to fix it, he'd be back on the air already.
I think that the other Rabbi Fine should take over.
I don't have the text in front of me that he's going to go teach, though.
Are you in Denver now?
Yes, we're in Denver.
Yes.
Yeah.
At least we're in Denver according to the flesh. But according to the spirit, I'm not sure. It depends.
That
I
could
guess
be-
we're
that
with
could
you
be-
according to the spirit.
Spirit, we're with you. Right.
A happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year
Yes.
to you too. Is there a way we can leave him a text
There's no connection here
no connection to him at all?
to him. Yeah.
Happy New Year, everybody.
good night, and I hope he's okay. Everybody's all right. Be well. I don't know.
Should we try
Oh,
calling?
he was just ready to make his summation.
Summation, yeah, a lot to say. We want to hear it.
I just hope he's all right.
I hope that wasn't a 1 hour Zoom as opposed to, the longer ones.
Well, it's only 45 minutes so far.
Yeah.
Right, he was on before.
David?
Oh, you mean, oh
So if
dear.
it was limited, we wouldn't be able to talk to one another. So I don't think that applies.
Good point.
Can you leave it a note for him?
Oh, here he comes. Here
Oh, there he is.
Hello. Here I am.
Oh,
Sorry about that.
yeah.
Welcome back.
thought we had all the technical difficulties at the synagogue, so I'm doing this from my home, and there's technical difficulties no matter where I am. But
Everybody was worried about you.
I'm still here.
What, you
but
were abducted?
By some anti-Semites.
I was clearly struck down because I was being harsh with St. John, right?
Yeah.
So were you? Well, we are in the passage from the father, the devil. With you, I don't know when I lost you all. Is that where we are?
Yes, yeah, yes.
Okay,
Yes.
so let me put that back on the share screen 1 second, and let me make sure it looks like we're still recording. I was worried that I would have had lost all of you, so I'm glad you're all here. Okay, where is this share screen button? And here we are.
Okay, good.
Current slide. Okay, great. So no, one up. Okay, so here we are. So I read, I don't know what time I lost you, but the passage is Jesus is having a discussion with Jews, and they say, we are all from Abraham, we're all from God. And Jesus says, no, I'm not from God, and you're not. I'm from God, not you. You're not from Abraham or God. Your father is the devil. Whoever from God listens to the word of God. The reason why you do not listen is that you are not from God. And I had read this, want to read this important passage from David Nirenberg from his book, Anti-Judaism. That's his comment on this passage. So I'll read it here again. John's response seems to be an adaptation of Paul's argument that one can be Abraham's heir in the spirit as well as the flesh. But Paul made the distinction in order to make room for the Gentiles within Christianity, while at the same time maintaining the traditional paternity of the Jews. John does quite the opposite. He strips the Jews of their lineage, assigns to them a demonic spiritual paternity, and insists on their eternal role as enemies of God. So the point there he's saying is that Paul is the apostle to the Gentiles, right? He's going to convert the Greeks to Christianity. And unlike other leaders in the early Christian church, Paul is saying you don't have to be Jewish in order to be Christian, so that you don't have to be a physical descendant of the seed of Abraham. You could be a spiritual heir of Abraham. So Paul is extending the tent of what it means to be children of Abraham. What John is doing is he's going the opposite direction. He's saying that we're not including the non-Jewish Christians under the umbrella of the Jews. It's actually the opposite. We're now excluding the Jews because the Christians are the children of God and Jews are the children of the devil. And that's what it says here. So what he does take from Paul, though, Nirenberg doesn't quite emphasize this, is seeing things as through dichotomies, right? And he's using Jews here as a symbol. This is not an actual discussion that Jesus is having with Jews, and it's not meant as a sermon given to Jews. It's the Jews are being used as a symbol to show that if you're a child of God, being a child of God means that you recognize Jesus, who is God incarnate on earth that is brought to bring salvation to the world. And if you don't recognize that, and you're not listening to that, it means that you're not a child of God. It means you're a child of the devil, right? Because you don't see the truth in front of you, and you give into the temptation of doubt. And for that, and we're going to use the symbol Jew to represent what that means. In the same way that Paul talks about Jew is focusing on the body and Christianity focuses on the spirit. So the point is, while this comes across as very harsh, a way to read John is that he's not speaking about actual Jews. He's trying to explain why Christians are the children of God, but by using the symbolism of Jews as the opposite of that, you can understand how, of course, passages like these can be used by later people who hear these passages and then will go out or will develop into anti-Semitism because they see the Jews, the actual physical Jews in front of them, as those children of the devil that Jesus, through in this passage in the Gospel of John, is condemning. So we see here how, while we're talking about the paternity, where Jews come from, where Jesus comes from, this also is a text about the paternity of anti-Semitism. So going back to the question from the last two sessions, is there anti-Semitism? Is there anti-Judaism before Christianity? Of course there is, but you can see here how when Christianity develops, the nature of anti-Jewish discourse reaches a new level, because anti-Judaism, and this is Nierenberg's point in his book, that anti-Judaism is is one of the ways that Christianity defined itself, using Judaism as a symbol, and ideas, as we know, words are powerful. The last thing I want to talk about here is the symbol of the Pharisee, and you'll explain where I'm going here. In the 23rd chapter of the Gospel of Matthew, there's this whole section when Jesus does a whole series of harangues, and each paragraph starts, "Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees and hypocrites." And it goes, it continues on, it happens about a dozen, maybe 7, 8 times. It's interesting. It says Laura Brody with drawing on the, I don't know how you did that, Laura. That's impressive. I had red drawings on the bottom. Okay, so the Pharisees, of course, are one of the early 1st century sects of Judaism. There's the Pharisees, there's the Sadducees, there's the Essenes. Those are the 3 divisions that Josephus talks about. He calls them philosophies. Today, we generally understand them as sectarians. There's also the Dead Sea sect. There's a debate whether those were Essenes or those were a whole different group. And the rabbis developed later. The Christians, probably more contemporary with the Pharisees, or probably grew out of the Pharisees. And many scholars say that Jesus was a really very left-wing Pharisee himself. And the Pharisees were concerned with biblical interpretation, with purity measures. And much of rabbinic Judaism grows out of the Pharisees and their approach to interpreting Torah. In the Christian Bible, the Pharisees are the rabbis, right? Although it's used anachronistically on purpose, because at the time that the New Testament is being written, there are no more Pharisees anymore. But instead of saying rabbis or Jews, it refers to the Pharisees, because you can have a picture of this, who are the opponents of Jesus. And there's other sections in the Christian Bible and the Gospels where Jesus is arguing with the Pharisees. So I want to point out just the point that it says, and the term Pharisees is synonymous with scribes. Scribes are also supposed to make us think of rabbis, about priests, about the elite scribe, the elite literal, not just literary, but literal culture that Christianity is breaking in, because Christianity is focusing on the spirit, not on the letter. If you're a scribe, you're obsessed with the letter, not the spirit. And of course, hypocrites. And we want to see how this symbol carries down in our own day. And a definition of Pharisee and a drink menu in a cafe in Berlin. So I'm going to show you 2 other screen shares if I have it here. Okay, I just have to prepare this. Hold on. Okay. Now, right. Okay. You can see my screen here, Google?
Yes.
Typed in Pharisee, and here's Google's definition. A member of an ancient Jewish sect distinguished by strict observance of the traditional and written law and commonly held to have pretensions to superior sanctity, or a self-righteous person, a hypocrite. So as you can see that this is Google, and this is accessed on January 3rd, 2022. And January 3rd, 2022, the second definition of Pharisee after the historical definition is a hypocrite or a self-righteous person. So you can see that the way that Pharisee, which was a term for the ancient Jews, is being used in Christian Bibles through the mouth of Jesus to sort of, it's a stereotype of Jewish literalism and archaism, that which is surpassed by the superior spirituality of Christianity, because the Pharisees are hypocrites. They are obsessed with understanding God's message, and yet they're hypocrites because they focus on matters of purity, not on matters of love. And we had time, we would look at more examples of that. And if you look in any dictionary, and you could look in the OED, from the OED to a Google search, you will get hypocrite as a definition of the term Pharisee. And I want to show you now another example. There is, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Same here, good. Okay, this is a website for a cafe in Berlin. It's a fancy cafe called Cafe Einstein. Yes, named after Albert Einstein. So you would think, okay, this is a Jew-friendly place, and it's more than a cafe. It's a full restaurant, but it's with an old. The photo here, it's with a whole house with high ceilings, and you feel like you're walking into a fine cafe of the 1920s. And I was sitting there with a colleague of mine just in October when I was in Berlin, and happened to notice this on the menu. And I was kicking myself for not taking a picture of it at the time. Okay, sorry, Jerry has a question here. Were the high priest members of the Pharisee sect? So no, the priests were mostly associated with the sect of the Sadducees. And the Pharisees were in opposition to the priestly establishment. But it's very, very good question. So I was kicking myself. I didn't take a picture of the menu, but it's right here.
Must have been on Shabbat. Must have been Shabbos. That's why you didn't take the picture.
Yes, of course. So, but we can get the menu here, and I want to go to the drink menu, and because it is a cafe, a fancy cafe here, and let's go to our drinks, and here it is. Okay, so you can see it's got, so this is fruit brandies, fruit branda, and liquor vine. We got whiskey, grappa, vodka, cognac, brandy, aperitifs, beer, alcohol-free menu, all different kinds of drinks here. And then over in this section, there's the cafe. And that's sort of in the middle, and you can get tasa as a cup, so espresso, this or that, cafe latte, iced espresso, okay. And then we have different specialty cafes, and there's Einspeiner is coffee with whipped cream, okay, and here's double espresso with vanilla ice cream, and an amaretto shot. Wiener Ice Cafe is coffee with vanilla ice cream and whipped cream, and it's the Viennese ice cream coffee. Fiaker is coffee with Slivovitz and whipped cream. There's Irish coffee that we see some places here is coffee with Irish whiskey. But look at this one. Can you see that there? Pharisaeer. So you can order a Pharisee. And what is a Pharisee? It's coffee with rum and whipped cream. Now, not only am I kicking myself that I didn't take a picture of the menu, but it's okay, we have it here. I was thinking at the time, if I wanted to be a difficult visiting American, I could have asked the waiter, why is it called a Pharisee? It would have been interesting what he would have said. But I think it's obvious why it's called a Pharisee, because it's coffee with rum and whipped cream. And that's hypocritical, right? Because those are two competing tastes. We have the caffeine of the coffee, and then you have the alcohol, the rum, and you have the whipped cream. So it's hypocritical, and that's why it's called a Pharisee. That's the only way that I can make sense of myself why it's called a Pharisee. The only other interpretation is because it is Cafe Einstein. Maybe Albert Einstein liked to drink that, and he was Jewish, so they called him a Pharisee. I think it's more likely because it's a hypocritical drink because of the different flavors there. So I brought you that example both from today's access to the internet. One, the definition of the term Pharisee, and the name for a alcoholic coffee that you can order on the streets of Berlin today. And the thing about Berlin is that, of course, there is a Jewish community there. Why was I in Berlin? I was having dinner with another rabbi and teaching in a rabbinical school, but nevertheless, it's a country that has, in a sense, been emptied of Jews, and maybe that's why there's not the sensitivity. I would hope that in New Jersey, Starbucks could not get away with having a Pharisee latte, being offered on the menu. But nevertheless, it still remains shocking to me that that is on the menu there. But they're symbolic of the strength of a symbol, which was the point of tonight's talk, that Judaism holds a symbolic power in the foundational texts of Christianity. And that power, 2,000 years later, continues to reverberate as something that is oppositional. I'll take a moment for questions, but before that, just I say we're about 50 people on the screen tonight, so it's wonderful to see all of you here. I have to take the next 2 weeks off, so our next class is going to be on 3 weeks from tonight, which is January 24th, and then we're going to talk about the next chapter in Jewish-Christian relations with anti-Judaism, which is the Church Fathers, and we're going to look at different views. Some of the writings of the Church Fathers, those are the main theologians of the church in the late ancient period. Some of them are virulently anti-Jewish. Others, like Augustine, are more complicated. So we're going to look at those and understand how that carries on the next stage of Christian theological writings about Jews, and how those texts, like the biblical texts here, play a role in then Christian policy of the Christian states and cities in the medieval period, which is where we'll go after that. So thank you for your attention, and thanks also for waiting for me to reconnect with everyone. If anyone has any questions or comments, we certainly have a few moments for that.
Great job, Rabbi. Thank you. Interesting.
Thank you.
Rabbi,
Yes.
it's Linda. You haven't, when you speak of the truth of Christ, you haven't talked about the divinity and anything about the whole idea of what the Messiah is supposed to be, and whether, that is part of this whole rejection of the truth of Christ.
Right. So whether Jesus is an element of God, or whether Jesus is the Son of God or the messenger of God, these are matters of tremendous dispute at the beginnings of Christianity. And the Christian scriptures can be read in all different ways. So I avoided that because I didn't want to get into those issues, because that's multiple different lectures to try to make sense of that. But no matter whether it's understood as Jesus God's Son, is Jesus an element of God's self in the Trinity, and are they of the same? In terms of the understanding of Judaism, they all have the same message, because Jesus is the sign, right? Is the one of God's presence on earth, and that the issue is that the Jews, from the Christian perspective, they were the ones who did not see that and did not, whatever that is, and the Christians disagree with themselves on what that is, whatever that is, the Jews could not see it and could not acknowledge it. So whatever branch you fall on in the theological disputes of the divinity of Jesus, you're still whatever you are, that's still, Judaism is still the opposing symbol in understanding that. But Linda, that's an excellent question, and there's really I can't answer that on one foot. The Messiah, I know we talk about it. Messiah is a Jewish concept, and Christus is the Greek translation of the Hebrew word Mashiach, which means the anointed one. And it began as just the one who was the rightful king. Right, so because if David is anointed as the king, and the descendants of David are the Mashiach, so we have a line in the prayer book we say that we pray towards the Mashiach ben David, which is the Messiah, son of David. So the first chapter of the Gospel of Matthew gives the genealogy that shows that Jesus, from Joseph and backwards, is descended directly in a line from David, which means that Jesus is a Davidite. Now, if you then talk about the conception of, Mary being a virgin who conceives, then there's no line from Joseph to Jesus. So then what's the point of the genealogy in Matthew 1? Again, the theologies were in flux. And just like our Bible incorporates different ideas, the Christian Bible also incorporates different competing theological ideas. It's often argued that the way that Christianity was presented to Jewish audiences was focusing on Jesus as a Messiah, whereas the way that Christianity was marketed to non-Jewish Greek audiences was that Jesus was God on earth, and that God taking human form is a trope from Greek mythology. God's anointed being the divinely right king is a trope from biblical history and biblical tradition. So they're drawing on two different literatures. And that's the way to really understand the development of Christianity, that it took from Greco-Roman, from Greek heritage and from Jewish heritage and melded the two, which is what Christianity became. Those are the two parents, in a sense, of Christianity.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
It's interesting that the Christians have the virgin birth and the Jews have the birth of Isaac from Sarah at 90 years old.
Yes, and in the church fathers, who are sort of the authors of the Midrash, the Christian Midrash, see the binding of Isaac and the story of Isaac as the term is prefiguration, as prefiguring the story of Jesus. That yes, Isaac is a miraculous birth, and then he's slaughtered on. He carries the wood up the mountain with him, which is carrying the cross, and then he's basically crucified by Abraham on the cross of the wood. Except that the angel comes and saves Isaac, so also Jesus is resurrected. So there's the tie between those two stories. But any important figure in a mythological sense is when you have the birth stories, there's always going to be something special about the birth. It's an indication that this is special. We were talking about that in synagogue a couple of weeks ago with Moses, right? Where the Pharaoh wanted to kill all the baby boys, and Moses survives baby boys, and then he's in a basket on the Nile. So all these miracles take place, which is a sign also of Moses' role in the salvation history in the Bible. So Jesus is playing that role as well.
Wow.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Rabbi, before we
Yes.
go,
Go ahead.
I would like
Karen.
to recommend tomorrow night an educational program, Jewish education program, a totally different subject, but I think very interesting. Drisha Institute in New York is an Orthodox organization devoted to just Jewish learning, and it started out as for women, but now it's for everybody. Tomorrow night they're hosting an author talking about, and I don't know how to pronounce this, Kthenis. These were prayers in Yiddish for women in the early modern period through today. They were written by both men and women for women, and they're sort of quasi-liturgical prayers for women. And there's a woman who wrote a book on it, speaking tomorrow night at 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock. The Drisha programs are free, although they ask you to make a donation. And the organization is Drisha, DRISHA.org.
Thanks, Sharon. And you did pronounce it correctly. Have a good night, everybody, and happy 2022. Bye-bye.
Very much. Wonderful lecture. Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.